Next, Dr. Joseph Conlon. He is the director of Ralston's famous Greek program and professor of Greek here at Ralston College.
It is truly a pleasure to be here today, and I hardly dare to add to everything that has been said already, but I will try as best as I can. And I'd like to talk particularly about why I believe that language pedagogy is the foundation for Renaissance and for cultural renewal. Now, this might seem, depending on your perspective, something that is ridiculous or something that is very obvious. And I'd like to start by just making a few comments about what language is and what it does, how it functions. And I think that these are all pretty obvious, but I would like to outline them and then talk about why, in particular, we teach Greek the way that we do and why we have Greek and Latin as the foundation for our curriculum here at Ralston. So one of the things that language does, and maybe this is a funny way of putting it, but that it connects us automatically to the generation that has come before us. And what I mean is all of the words that I'm using here today, all of the words that we know in our head, were all first uttered by people who are long dead. And as we grow up, the language of our parents is, and the world around us is imprinted on our brains. We're literally being stamped with the words of the past. In the next generation, we then do that for those who come after us. And maybe this seems like sort of like as I said, an obvious remark to make, but that is the function of language on the scale of a century or so, maybe 2 centuries or 3 centuries. It's to take culture and move it from one generation to another generation, from the lowest level, the level of the word, the lexeme, the verb, to the higher level, the level of the story, the song. And these are just being transmitted from generation to generation. Now, the function of a language, because languages are always changing, it can only do this for about 100, 200, maybe 300 years, 400 years at maximum, before the language itself ceases to become an adequate vehicle of the transmission of culture, right? And the reason this is that after about 400 years, people cease to be able to understand the language of their own ancestors. So this is just one sort of basic observation about the function of language. A second is that language is one of the strongest ways that we signal our cultural identity, the group that we belong to. An example of this would be immigrants that come over to America. Maybe in the first generation, they speak their native language, whether it's Chinese or Italian, and they try very, very hard to pass that on to their children. And that first generation of children born here, they might still identify and say, like, yes, I'm an Italian, or yes, I'm Chinese. But normally by the third or fourth generation, all that's left, especially if the language hasn't been transmitted, all that's left is maybe a handful of recipes and traditions about the origin of our family. And it's really with the death of the language in a particular family, we observe the death of that culture, the death of the transmission of that culture, quite on a literal way, that oftentimes children were not able to speak to their grandparents if they're raised here and the grandparents are monolingual. And so identity is deeply tied to the language that we speak. It's the way that we not only single the group that we identify with, but it's the thing that invites us into participation with that group. And the third thing that I'd like to say about language, before I turn over to Greek and Latin in particular, is that language is something that allows us to create relationships with other human beings. This is, of course, very obvious, but without language, without communication between two souls, between two individuals, you cannot, well, first off, know yourself, and you can't know the person that you're speaking with. And the second we try to put an intermediary between two individuals, whether that's a translator or an interpreter or a commentary, the connection that can occur between the two hearts of two human beings is broken, right? And so we use language on a daily basis to form a close relationship with other human beings. Now, as I said at the beginning of these 3 observations, language has this function, the vernacular languages have this function on the scale of the century, the decade, the century, perhaps a couple of centuries. But Latin and Greek, these dead languages, fill a different function in our world. And I'll go through each of these. So Latin and Greek, they're dead languages. We sometimes call that, but what that really means is that they've stopped the process of change, right? So unlike vernacular language, which is every every couple hundred years become unidentifiable. Greek and Latin more or less have stayed the same for the entirety of their history. And there's many reasons for that, but a lot of it has to do with the early creation of the classics, the creation of a canon to which all subsequent authors would have reference when they were composing their texts. So Greek and Latin became technologies for the transmission of culture that exceeded the perspective of the century. That if you would like to be able to preserve knowledge for a millennium or for 2 millennia or for 3 millennia, that you would need a vehicle to create a community that exists across time, not just across a couple of centuries. Latin and Greek, in particular, these become, I mentioned earlier that the language is one of the ways that we single our identity to a group. When I think about what it means to be a member of the West, and not just right now, but across the last 2 millennia, the way that for century after century that we have singled our participation in what is the West is by speaking in a certain way and by learning the languages of Greek and Latin. It was through the learning of the languages of our ancestors that we identified ourselves. It didn't matter if your native language was English or German or French or Italian, right? But that everybody across the entire European continent became part of one family that existed at that moment in time, but then also existed in the centuries that came before it. And the third element, as I mentioned, is the creation of friendships, or the creation of personal connections between other human beings. And now this is something that Petrarch writes about absolutely beautifully, that Petrarch himself, and you've probably heard me speak about this before, saw the ancients as not just people that, marble busts that you put up on a pedestal in a museum, but he saw them as interlocutors. He saw them as friends. He wrote letters in Latin to Cicero and to Seneca. He wrote a beautiful dialogue between himself and Augustine, talking about, the difficult times that he lived through, and looking to Augustine to help him cure the suffering and depression that he had in his soul, losing all of his loved ones. He really believed that these individuals were his friends and that they were participants in the same community with him. He really quite literally grafted himself on to this tradition, to this long family tradition, and it really is Greek and Latin are the languages of the big family that we call the West. And it's so essential for us, if we really would like to enter into that long community that is stretched back for thousands of years, we must learn the languages. And not only do we have to learn the languages in the way that they are usually taught these days to analyze them and learn all of the grammar, we have to learn them in the way that Petrarch himself learned them and the scholars of the Renaissance learned them. That is by using them and speaking them and by revivifying the languages with every breath that we take. It's almost as if when we're speaking Latin or Greek, you can't help but not feel that you are one of a member of this large community. And I think I'll close by saying that we are now at a time where we've somewhat turned our backs on the past, and I mean that in the Homeric sense. You'll know that Homer. And the Greeks themselves believes that we were walking backwards into the future. Why? Because the past is in front of us and we can see the past. These are the obvious things. The future is unknown and it is behind us. And this is how the Greeks conceived of the passage of time. And once we turn our backs on the past, we're actually we're not just singly blind, we're now doubly blind, because we can't see what's in front of us, right, which was the past, and we also still are as equally ignorant about what is going to come. And when we look at figures like Petrarch or Erasmus that are engaged in the process of cultural renewal and renaissance, their ability to look backwards is balanced by their ability to look forward. They're constantly looking backwards and forwards in a beautiful way, and you can see this in the writings of the humanist scholars, that they're writing in a language that they thought was going to be understood not just 100 years or 200 years or 300 years in the future by their own great-great-great-grandchildren, but 500 or 1,000 years into the future, that they were writing for eternity. They had a completely different sense of time. But we also see it in the way that things were built. That this is an idea that stretches back to antiquity. This is something that we talked about when we visited the Basilica Cistern in Constantinople, the sewage system of the Great Basilica, which is more beautiful than any building that's built in the last 70 years. It was never meant to be seen. It was just filled with water. And it was just sort of an accident that we discovered it. And if your sewage system outlives your civilization by 1,000 years, right, and is more beautiful than anything that we can produce, it says something about the way that these individuals thought about their place in time, right? They were equally connected to the future, the millennium that's coming, as they were to the past. And the only way to really do that is if we share a common language. If there's no intermediate, there's no sense that I'm going to fear that some of the things that I write now are going to be misunderstood by people 500 years or 1,000 years into the future. And it's through the cultivation of Latin and Greek, not just as scholarly tools, but as things that we actively use in our own lives, that we can then lay the foundation for the building of this community. Because no community can really exist without a common language and without a sense of appreciation and friendship, with the sense of true friendship and appreciation for everything that we have, all the benefits of our society that have been given to us that we have that we ourselves have not participated in creating. And by learning these languages and by reading Plato and Petrarch and Cicero in the original, we begin to see them as people that were just like one of us. I often say that we speak Greek, ancient Greek and Latin here as the analogy, right? That if I can speak this language with someone in the here and now as a friend, I can also then take that relationship to the past and begin to read Plato as an individual, not to be worshipped or to be discarded, but as another human being who is trying to figure out what it means to be a body that has this eternal soul stuffed into it and all the difficulties that come with it, and that was trying to save some knowledge for posterity. There's no real way that I see to do that, to reform our perspective and our orientation to the past than through learning the languages and being able to see these other individuals that have come before us for thousands of years as our friends, as people that we can walk with and grow with and learn with. Thank you.
Maybe 15 or so.